So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. As I'm sure you can see, we are going to be looking at Helm's Deep today. And interestingly enough, just before we start, I'm sure the developers are probably already aware of this, but this is actually the old version of Helm's Deep, which means if you have any more than 3 attackers, one person starts off in the hills and their army instantly gets eviscerated. So fortunately in this case, however, there are only 3 attackers, but I'm sure the developers are going to change that in the hotfix, because it would appear that the old version of Helm's Deep has sort of been substituted into 0.97 rather than the version that was modified for Reforged, so that there is a pathway in the mountain, so the person who starts back there in the event that there are 4 or more attackers doesn't get immediately killed. But regardless, we have what is apparently a sort of book recreation of the Battle of Helm's Deep. So of course we have some Rohan armies here within Helm's Deep and some Isengard armies marching on it. So it's going to be an interesting fight to be sure. I'm told that it's a very good one as well. So we shall start off with the attacking armies, of course, because we all know how Helm's Deep is laid out. It's quite a simple fortress in the end, but very iconic indeed. We shall start off. It is also, it's worth mentioning, nighttime, and nighttime is very difficult to record in Medieval 2 because the night battles are very dark. Even with the shaders and turning the brightness up very high like I have here, it can be a little bit difficult. I've done my best. It does look kind of menacing how the Isengard army is going to be sort of moving out from the shadows towards Helm's Deep itself, but this should be a little bit better than the previous night battles I've done. I think that you can actually see things a little bit more easily here, but hopefully that will be the case anyway. So, starting off with the first Isengard army, we have the Space Wizard, who has got some URUK-HAI infantry pushing up some siege rams. URUK-HAI infantry over here. One thing that Isengard can certainly have over Rohan is a lot more diversity in their heavier infantry. Like, certainly Isengard will do much better on the attack in a siege like this just by using pure muscle than Rohan will. Rohan often have to go about things in a different way, and the URUK-HAI infantry is certainly a big part of that. While Rohan do have some line infantry of their own, which is not half bad, Isengard certainly is better in terms of their armour and their shields, which often of course means that they will do a little bit better in an offensive siege like this. We've also got some URUK-HAI Berserkers, of course, obviously very iconic from the movie version of the Battle of Helm's Deep, where the Berserkers were the first ones in. And you had the guy who ran into the bomb to blow himself up, and of course the wall. Speaking of which, we have the Berserkers pushing up the Fire of Orthanc, which is the black powder cards, of course. So we'll see if Isengard are going to be able to blow a few holes in the walls with their mines, or if they're killed off by cavalry or archers on the approach. We've got some Trolls of the White Hand, which are another thing Rohan might struggle to deal with if they send the wrong kind of units after them. Rohan most certainly have the kind of units which can burn down Trolls pretty quickly. Got a very good heavy axemen. They've of course got their the Helm Hammers as well, the best unit of infantry that Rohan can field. And of course Cavalry, which is very good at charging into Trolls and killing off models quickly, but we shall see. Pikes are another thing Rohan lack entirely, but we'll get on to how Rohan can deal with pikes when we go through their armies. Crossbows, something else which Isengard have over Rohan, very much two opposing philosophies that Isengard and Rohan have going on here. But of course the crossbows, a lot of good stopping power, but they do need to get into a good position before they can use their ammunition well. Otherwise they will be wasting most of it, and it will be very precious indeed. URUK-HAI archers, of course, much more disposable in what they can do, 5 units of them in fact, and then a couple more units of pikemen there. So Isengard will be able to put pressure on Rohan from afar with their archers a little bit more freely before they can hopefully get their crossbows into position to do a lot of damage to the Rohirrim infantry within the fortifications. The second Isengard army is MP Bekami 13, and he has got some raiders and, well, we'll get onto that in a moment, but some raiders here. Obviously not as good as the URUK-HAI infantry. This is the sort of unit which Rohan will be quite comfortable facing in melee, but there are a lot of them, and of course, you know, wearing down the enemy is going to be very much what Isengard are going to be trying to do in the early game. Some Nazkai, which overall are going to be the strongest unit of infantry on the field, regardless of what Rohan have brought, because they are extremely strong, the Nazkai. But there are only so many of them, and they are also quite expensive, let's not forget that. Some URUK-HAI archers over here as well as some crossbowmen, so some more range components, but it is worth mentioning here, there's quite a few ranged units here. If they've gone for too many ranged units, Isengard could be in trouble, because they could end up not really being able to get a foothold within the settlement itself. It looks as though he's got for 2 units of Trolls of the White Hand here as well, so that's a big investment in his Trolls, but of course, you know, Trolls can be very, very devastating. Some Guards of Orthanc, some very heavily armoured spears, maybe not the best choice against Rohan, because while they can, of course, help to zone out cavalry, they are a very small unit, and if it does come down to them having to muck in the infantry fight, Rohan have got a lot of heavy axemen, which will be quite efficient against such a unit. URUK-HAI pikemen over here, more reavers, so some good cheap AP here. Rohan don't have as much armour as most of the other Western Kingdoms of men, but AP will still be somewhat useful, especially against the higher tier units. URUK-HAI Reavers over here, some Berserkers as well, another AP unit, but of course multiple HP, very high base attack as well. Lurtz Hunting Pack, crossbows and archers. Lurtz Hunting Pack, of course, body piercing, but they, much like the crossbows, it's going to be quite key to see how they manage to get into position. If they can't, then chances are they're going to be ripped to pieces by Rohirrim archers from the walls. And then some more URUK-HAI Raiders. Then the final attacking army around the corner over here, we have Nowaki, and we have some more URUK-HAI infantry. So again, looks like he's gone for much more of a balanced approach with the infantry, which is good to see, because I think the URUK-HAI infantry are one area where Isengard can certainly lay down a bit of a marker in this fight against Rohan. Some crossbows as well. Obviously, you're always going to see crossbows when you're facing against Isengard. Berserkers, Guards of Orthanc, more Reavers, some pikes back here. We do have some half-orc spear guard, which is an interesting pick because, of course, you know, Isengard, usually they'll go for pikes for sort of long polearm-like infantry, but if they do want a unit of basic spears, they do have the half-orc spear guard, because, of course, the only other spears they really have are the Dunlending Clansmen, which are a militia unit, which are very cheap, and their morale is shocking, to say the least. Some Trolls of the White Hand, some more URUK-HAI pikes, more URUK-HAI archers. So good to see that Nowaki seems to have gone for a much more melee focused build, because if they went for too many skirmishes, like I said, Rohan will be able to sort of hide behind Helm's Deep's fortifications and then just wait for Isengard to burn themselves out. And then another unit of the Fire of Orthanc. Now let's move on to the defenders back here. So there's no Lothlorien, because of course this is a book variant, I think, of the siege, so we won't be seeing Lothlorien fighting alongside Rohan, which is a shame for Rohan, because Lothlorien would be able to sort of make up for some of their shortcomings. But to be honest, I have a new appreciation for Rohan in this patch, and which is interesting considering the fact that the things that Rohan are traditionally quite good at, which is sort of horse skirmishers, cavalry in general, are not necessarily the things which have received the most in terms of buffs in 0.97. That's much more like infantry and the like. But I quite like playing as Rohan, actually. I've got a new appreciation for them. The Riddermark archers are very cheap, of course. They will just be up here on the walls, attacking Isengard as they move forwards. Sidious307, who I believe is the one who sent me the replay. It's kind of difficult to tell. It might have been Velupai as well. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. All their armies are very sort of mixed together, so we'll be going through them both at the same time. Riddermark archers, of course, very, very basic archers, but still they'll be able to do some damage to Isengard on the approach, depending on how aggressive Isengard want to be. And then we have the more impressive Helmingas in behind them. The Helmingas also have a bit of a shield value, also much better armour than the Riddermark archers in front of them. They aren't on the same level as something like the Bardian Marksman, but they will still be a unit which is very much at home in a more elongated skirmish fight than anything else Rohan have, really. So if you do want to, High Ruler over Lorien, so there are actually 3 armies on the defence as well, interestingly enough. But yeah, it's not too surprising. I think Helmingas is the sort of unit you'll probably see more in a siege like this. On a field battle, which is ironically where their armour and shields will probably come in more handy. I feel as though Rohan will often go for the cheaper archers and then maybe go for more of their expensive cavalry rather than go for a more foot-based army, even though they can do that. But yeah, High Ruler over Lorien, bringing some Helmingas. We've also got some Helms Hammers over here on the side. Obviously a very, very strong unit of multiple HP Macemen. I can't actually think of if there's any other multiple HP Macemen in the game. They may be the only ones, because most armour-piercing bodyguard units tend to be of the two-handed variety, like the Witch Realm Enslavers or Hammers, Tharbad Warhammers and the like. There's a lot of cavalry in here, but they're down here on the lower section where there's no way to escape. They could end up bottled up in here. The cavalry needs to be emptied out of the fortress very quickly, to be honest with you, if they are to have any sort of success, because if they get bound up in here, Isengard are going to very easily be able to bottle Rohan up. We've got some Aerid of Aldberg, which are the upper-end Lancers. Only the Knights and the multiple HP Lancers are stronger than them. Very, very impressive, very quick, a lot of damage off the charge. We also have some Riddermark Cavalry, which is sort of the mid-ground. Rohan have got 3 units of sort of Lancers that they can fill their army with, and the Riddermark Cavalry are in the middle of them. So probably the unit you'll probably see least of, to be honest with you, because you'll probably see them either go for the upper-end version or the more cheap, or the cheaper variant. We've got some Westmark infantry in here, which are Rohan's line infantry, which are not half bad, honestly. Much like the Serpent Guard, they maybe lack a little bit in terms of armour and shield value in comparison to some of the other Western Kingdoms of men. But they can most certainly hold their own, and in the battles that I've played as Rohan, they have certainly not let me down. So they probably won't be on the same... I feel as though the additional armour and the better shields of the URUK-HAI infantry do make them slightly superior. But even so, they do have the advantage of the fortifications here. Westmark Marshals, in terms of looks, they're most certainly my favourite Rohan unit. Very, very powerful, of course. Very good heavy axemen. A lot of good AP, which is going to be very useful against a faction like Isengard, and because they are the upper end of axemen, they do have slightly better skill and armour, which will keep them alive, but not as much as heavy swordsmen tend to have. We've got some Westmark Spearmen. Spears and Axemen are most certainly Rohan's focus in terms of infantry. They may not have pikes, but the spears can do kind of the same job for them, and the Westmark Spearmen, of course, can form up that shield wall. More Riddermark Spears, which once again are sort of the mid-ground. We have some more Westmark Marshals. We have some dead cavalry in here, this is one of the issues with the this version of the Helm's Deep map, is the fact that the deployment zone is kind of skewed. So some units can end up dying, which is a real shame. I do hope that the hotfix addresses that. In general, I feel as though there are quite a few issues with some of the siege maps in 0.97, which is one of the main things I hope the hotfix does fix, because it is sorely needed. A lot of the really good maps like Minas Ithil, which people want to play, are at the moment unavailable because something went wrong in development. Eastmark Riders, the cheapest of the Lancers, of course, which comes with all of the downsides but all of the benefits that you would expect. We also have some Riddermark Spearmen in here, more Riddermark Archers, more Riddermark Spears, Eastmark Horse Archers, so some Horse Archers are also here, so we'll see how useful they are. More Westmark Marshals, a lot of these heavy Axemen, which is going to be a problem for Isengard with all of the AP that they're going to be thrown their way. Riddermark Axemen as well, the sort of the basic variant, which of course are far less survivable but cheaper, and they still offer a lot of attack and AP. We have the Red Shields of Erkenbrand, which in terms of unit models are much like the Westmark Marshals, only mounted, and of course their bow cavalry, which pull out swords in melee when things get heated up close and personal. Eastmark Scouts are in there, the cheapest of all the Rohirrim cavalry. There's a lot of units here which are just all clustered together. Some Riders of the Fold, the better unit of Horse Archers that Rohan have, other than the Red Shields, of course, they're slightly stronger. The Shield Maidens of Rohan, which are one of the key units, they have their new unit model as well, which is good to see. But the key thing about these guys is, well, these girls, I should say, is the fact that they are Rohan's best defense against phalanx units. Rohan have no phalanx units of their own, but the way that axe throwers now work, they may have lost their AP, which means against heavily armoured and shielded units from the front, they won't do a huge amount of damage. However, their base damage is very high now, much higher than even that of javelins, which means if they do come up against a phalanx unit, axe throwers will rip them apart. So that's one of Rohan's best tools for that. And of course, in a siege battle in particular, Isengard's URUK-HAI pikemen will have to watch their backs most of the way through the settlement. Helm's Hammers over here, more Shield Maidens of Rohan, and the mighty Medjugorje Guard. Obviously very, very strong javelins, one of the strong units of javelins in the game, and then they also become a very strong unit in melee as well, fear causing, all of that good stuff. More Helmingas on the inner wall as well, some Shield Maidens up top, and are those some Medjugorje Guard in there? There are, deployed further forward. So, without further ado, let's begin. And the first thing, which is going to be key here, is Rohan getting all of their cavalry out onto the field, because if they keep them back in the settlement, they'll be completely wasted. With this much cavalry, Rohan are going to need to do a lot of damage early on if they're going to stand much of a chance in this fight. There are some Sons of Yor in here. The good thing, however, is the fact that Isengard in particular, with MP Bekami and with the Space Wizard, have gone for a lot of skirmishers, and not necessarily all of them being crossbowmen either. A lot of them are archers, which are not going to do a huge amount of damage over a long period of time to such a heavy amount of Rohirrim cavalry. And if I was this army, I would certainly go just front and centre for MP Bekami's army, because he has got some Guards of Orthanc moving forward. He's got the Nars-Kai right out here, which are a very juicy target indeed for all of this Rohirrim cavalry. Look at the amount of horses pouring out of Helm's Deep. This is the optimal Rohan experience. This is almost like the charge of the Rohirrim at Minas Tirith, let alone Helm's Deep. So, now is the opportunity that Rohan have been waiting for. They need to get in and charge very quickly here to destroy a lot of MP Bekami's army, because to be honest with you, they need to do damage with this cavalry, because a lot of their strength of their army is bound up in this cav. Meanwhile, over here I think that this is just some Eastmark Riders brushing up against the Nars-Kai rather than charging into them. I'm not sure whether there's a sort of gentleman's agreement here to allow all of the Rohirrim cavalry out onto the field, and I think that is actually what's happening, now that I come to see it. I feel as though this is sort of meant to be Eomer's force, and they're going to sort of head off into the hills over there, or into the trees I should say, and wait until later on so that they can be utilised. Although having said that, the Riddermark skirmishers, that is a breach of... Actually no, those aren't the Riddermark skirmishers, fortunately they are just the Horse Archers. If those were the Riddermark skirmishers with their javelins, they would have done horrendous damage to the URUK-HAI, but as it is, very basic horse archers like that, the URUK-HAI can tank that with their multiple HP and with their very nice armour. So all of this cavalry is going to head off into the hills over there, and then we can fully get underway. So I think with that in mind, we will make a little bit of a cut here, because I feel as though Isengard are going to dawdle a little bit as their armies get into a position so they can really start attacking Helm's Deep properly. So heading towards the gate, the Space Wizard, or the walls I should say, the Space Wizard is going to be using his URUK-HAI infantry to lead the way. His pikes are also in close proximity also. And of course, with all that cavalry being emptied out of Helm's Deep, there is very much a skeleton crew left to defend it, although much of these units are pretty good. Like, you have the Westmark Marshals in here, you also have the Westmark Infantry, the Riddermark Axemen may not be as strong, but they're still AP, which is going to be useful. Shield Maidens of Rohan, a lot of good stuff here that Rohan can use to hold the line until the late game, when of course the cavalry will be what ultimately wins or loses them the fight. URUK-HAI infantry coming in over here. I would have been more tempted, to be honest with you, to put some Riddermark Axemen over here, because while they would die off more easily than Westmark infantry, the AP is most certainly not going to be wasted on the URUK-HAI infantry, and of course the Riddermark Axemen are cheaper as well, not by much, but they are slightly cheaper than the Westmark infantry over here. And now you can see that the arrows are starting to flow forth from the keep of Helm's Deep, and they are immediately going to start ploughing into these URUK-HAI raiders. Maybe not the most worthwhile target, because they are shielded and they're very cheap as well. I would be much more interested in going after something like pikemen or reavers, and these reavers should be in range as well, because it is very high ground that the Rohan archers have. They're going to hide, however. Yeah, I would definitely go for the reavers. Any arrow that hits the reavers are likely going to kill them. The leather armour that they wear is not overly thick. A bit of flickering here on the tower. Obviously the lighting of Medieval 2, not the last word in terms of quality, but here comes the URUK-HAI infantry now. Now we shall see. This will be a bit of a litmus test here for the Westmark infantry. The URUK-HAI infantry have got substantially more men in the unit, but the Westmark infantry should be able to hold their ground for a while. Like, individually, the Westmark infantry may actually be better, but the numbers advantage the URUK-HAI infantry have, and also the armour and shields, means that I would still very much place this matchup in favour of Isengard. As the Westmark infantry use their swords to their advantage. The Riddermark Axemen are close by in support, so if reinforcements do need to head up onto the wall, the big axes that the Rohirrim use and are known for will be ready. And it's good to see that Isengard aren't dallying here, despite the fact they've got a lot of archers and they could just sort of stretch this fight out for a long period of time. I'm glad that the players are sort of getting stuck in right from the off. And we have the Westmark infantry holding the line here. That is a very interesting bit of movement here. What foul sorcery is Saruman engaged in now? I think they're actually trying to retreat. They are. So losing their bottle a little bit here. The Westmark infantry able to score a minor victory early on here, as the Isengard URUK-HAI archers immediately starting to try and do some damage from afar here. But I mean, it looks like they're only really going after Riddermark spearmen. Maybe going after the Shield Maidens of Rohan, but with such inaccurate arrows and also arrows of such low quality, not likely to do too much in the way of damage. A minor annoyance at most for Rohan, but of course Rohan don't stand a chance at beating all three of these Isengard armies this early in the fight, with all that cavalry and all the strength that they need to save for later. The URUK-HAI raiders coming up onto the walls, but of course they significantly weaker than the URUK-HAI infantry, and the Riddermark spearmen going to be able to hold the line, and with that archer support as well, the Rohirrim spears should be just fine as we get up into the guts of this fight. The brave Rohirrim holding the line. Yeah, with those fire arrows, like, URUK-HAI raiders have most of the weaknesses of the other orcs. Like, most of the Isengard roster is more professionally based than a lot of the other orc armies. However, the URUK-HAI raiders very much sort of standard fare for the orcs, and breaking them is very easy to do in the right situation. There's a lot of arrows going all over the place, fire arrows going right up into the air. Maybe a bit of friendly fire happening as well, though, into the Riddermark spears, but breaking a unit of URUK-HAI raiders that easily, a very worthwhile endeavour. I'm actually just wondering, what is going on over here? URUK-HAI archers firing into the horsemen. Now that, I think, that I would suggest is very unsporting from MP Beckamy, if the fact was, if what was intended was for the horses to be reinforcing later. And honestly, I would have flattened that unit. I would have punished him for that, even if, like, the thing was like, hey, don't shoot them. I would have killed that unit and just said, you know, it's your own fault. I'd have even activated the cavalry that early, you know, because he is way exposed there. And you've got to pay the price if you don't follow the rules, in my opinion. So yeah, don't break the rules if you're playing in a game like this. Like, don't try and poke away at the enemy's cavalry. Like, it's gonna charge into the rear of your army at some point, because that's the rules of the battle. You know, the way that you're going to win this fight is by front-loading your army and trying to break through these defences quickly with your superior infantry. Don't try and play silly buggers with your archers just to try and gain a bit of a leg up early. It's not sporting. And you're ultimately supposed to play the game to have fun, not to prove your superiority over someone by winning. Meanwhile, Westmark Spearmen and Riddermark Spearmen holding the gatehouse, but these URUK-HAI Raiders, a lot of good attack on them. AP as well, so they'll be able to do a little bit more damage against the Westmark Spearmen, who, by Rohan standards, have got decent armour. But there are Westmark Infantry over here. Honestly, I'd get some Shield Maidens of Rohan in here, because they'd be able to do horrendous damage to URUK-HAI Raiders. As it is, though, the Rohirrim Archers still raining hell down upon the Isengard forces as they approach. Although, again, you can see here that maybe a little bit of inexperience in some of the players, because, you know, it's not really worth your time going after trolls with archers. They're going to do very little damage, especially seeing as trolls of the White Hand have also got the armour and the shields to back up their enormous amount of hit points. So not really worth their time to do so. Arrows flying all over the place up here on the walls. Meanwhile, you can see that the URUK-HAI Raiders trying to clear a spot yet again. But with the support of the Riddermark Axemen, these URUK-HAI Raiders are almost certainly going to get squashed underfoot. The Guards of Orthanc are up on the wall, however, and they will be able to do very nicely against the Riddermark Spearmen. Good to see that some of the elite units are being committed forward early as well, because it will mean that sort of some of these basic Rohan units will start to struggle a little bit. But this is also a good opportunity for Rohan to utilise maybe their Medicelled Guard to kill off one of these elite units quite quickly. Westmark Spearmen waiting in reserve. Victory over here. Looks like the Space Wizard has come back for another bite of the cherry over on these siege towers with the URUK-HAI Infantry once again, but they are already shaken. The Westmark Infantry holding their ground resolutely in the face of the URUK-HAI Infantry, and they're also shaken with some close-range arrow shots into the side by the URUK-HAI, the Riddermark Archers. Another unit of URUK-HAI Infantry coming up onto the walls, but again the Riddermark Axemen are here. The additional AP, in addition to the support of the Westmark Infantry, means they should be able to hold the line for a little while longer yet. What I'm interested in seeing is whether or not the Black Powder card comes in, because that could cause havoc in the Rohan defence. Here we can see the Shield Maidens of Rohan now firing their volleys into the side. You can see some axes bouncing off the walls, but many of them finding their mark, and that is going to be enough to break another unit of URUK-HAI Infantry. But the Black Powder Mine, of course, has got a wide area effect where it knocks units over. It doesn't necessarily kill them. But over here, for example, they'd be able to blow up a lot of the Rohan Infantry. Westmark Spears, Riddermark Spears, even some Medicelled Guard might perish in that. So we'll see if they're able to do that. Meanwhile, over here, I think Rohan have been a little bit lax in defending the gatehouse. They've done a very good job down on the lower section of the fortress, but with the Trolls of the White Hand coming forward, they needed to commit forward a little bit more in terms of infantry more quickly. Their archers were never going to be able to kill the Trolls on the approach, and their naivete has been exposed a little bit somewhat. But the Trolls will start to fall here, because they've maybe bitten off a little bit more than they can chew, going into so many Westmark Marshals. But having said that, further towards the gate, all of these Trolls are going to do a lot of damage to these Rohirrim Spears. Like the Westmark Spearmen, they're a very good spear unit, but against Trolls, it's going to be a very difficult ask for them to do much damage. And now with URUK-HAI Raiders coming forward as well, Isengard's certainly starting to pile the pressure on the Rohan defence, and more reinforcements are needed over here. I think the Medicelled Guard are needed. I think Shield Maidens are also needed to contain this situation. Because as it is, Isengard are doing very well over here so far, and they need Rohan to do a lot of damage to Isengard on the approach. Well, there goes the Black Powder Mine. Let's go and see what sort of damage it actually managed to do. So they broke this section of wall over here, which is interesting because that actually also did a ton of damage to Isengard, including a lot of damage to Nazkai. So they've managed to do some damage to Rohan as well, and this will open up a large gap, and there's not a lot of Rohan infantry left to actually deal with an Isengard push through here. But honestly, like, that's a lot of dead Isengard forces, a lot of dead URUK-HAI infantry, dead Nazkai. There's another unit of Nazkai over here, but this is the opportunity perhaps that Isengard were waiting for, because Rohan don't have their... Once again, their defence is not really organised. They may have much less in terms of manpower than Isengard got to work with most of their force being bound up in their cav. They need to do a little bit better than this if they hope to win this fight. Shield Maidens of Rohan, they need to do a lot of damage to the on-rushing URUK-HAI pikes as they pour in through the gap. The Westmark Marshals are going to try and shut the jaws here, but this unit of Shield Maidens is already getting pummeled by the Trolls of the White Hand. The Westmark Marshals coming in. If they can prevent the URUK-HAI pikemen from getting their pikes down into phalanx, you can see some arrows are coming in here. The Riddermark Archers won't do grievous damage to URUK-HAI pikes just because URUK-HAI pikes have got good armour, but it's still very appreciated, I'm sure. And with the additional AP of the Riddermark Axemen and Westmark Marshals, hopefully Rohan can hold the line for a little bit longer. Meanwhile, the URUK-HAI pikemen on the walls, and you can certainly see here that the Shield Maidens of Rohan have been reaping a bloody toll, because the Guards of Orthanc maybe have retreated, or maybe they just straight up died, and the URUK-HAI pikemen are now going the same way. Medicel Guard are here. Finally, it looks as though Rohan are sending the appropriate force to deal with these rampaging trolls. The Helms Hammers will be able to bring them down. Very good stats on them, of course. To deal with trolls, you just need a unit of good infantry. That is a lot of Rohan forces coming in there, however. And unsurprisingly, Rohan are going to try and use their archers to do some good damage on them. Medicel Guard are over here, but I feel as though they're going after the depleted trolls, which is not necessarily what they should be doing. I think the Medicel Guard, if they get up onto this section of wall and threw their javelins down into that big blob of Isengard troops, that would be the better thing to do. Shield Maidens of Rohan throwing their axes from on high. But to be fair, Rohan have managed to contain the situation over here a little bit. They have still been forced back through the gate, and they won't be able to prevent that, but they have managed to set up a secondary defensive position, which is good. And ultimately, the URUK-HAI Raiders and Reavers are taking hits from arrows, and that will be especially detrimental to the continued existence of the URUK-HAI Reavers as they continue to move forward. Yeah, the Riddermark Spears and the Westmark Spears just doing their best to hold these units in place for as long as possible for those archers to get as much damage done to the light URUK-HAI Axemen as they possibly can, because the trolls will eventually kill too many to recover from. No, the Guards of Orthanc are here, so they must have retreated and now they're back. So once again, Helmingas now trying to hold the line, pulling out their blades in melee. They're decent in melee, but obviously no match for very elite spears like the Guards of Orthanc. Shield Maidens of Rohan in melee, but being overrun by URUK-HAI infantry, which being overrun is Rohan's ultimate fate in the fortress. It's just a case of whether they can do enough damage so that their cavalry and Eomer can come and save the day. Westmark Marshals on the front line, and you can see here that this is kind of the issue with heavy axemen, the fact that they do tend to take a lot of damage in melee quite quickly. It's one of the things which I hope is changed a little bit, because I think that something like their armour or their defensive skill needs to be raised just a little bit, because as it is, units like this, I love the look of the Westmark Marshals, but as it is, like they're very expensive for what they are. To be fair, they're not the worst defender. The Brotherhood of the Axe are extremely expensive and suffer from the same problems. But it is my hope that Axemen get made a little bit more resolute in melee, because at the minute, very much a flash in the pan. And, well, that is a big decision that Isengard just made. The wall is gone, but they're being very, very reckless, I think, here with their mines. I mean, to be fair, that is a lot of Rohan forces that also died, but Rohan and Isengard taking casualties in equal measure there from yet another black powder mine. I suppose it is true that Isengard can absorb more casualties than Rohan can in the fortress, so maybe that will be worthwhile, but with all of those arrows coming into position as well, there's some wavering going on from Rohan here as the mine takes its toll, but the Axemen are going to re-engage in melee once more and try to make Isengard's advance as costly as they possibly can. Riddermark Axemen, of course, once again, they are cheaper, but they also suffer from the same problems, but yeah, considering how they are significantly cheaper, that is much more understandable. Here come the URUK-HAI infantry, having to engage with the Helm Hammers, and yeah, once again up on this wall here, Rohan are going to be victorious once more, but with another gap into the settlement, Rohan are just running out of infantry to cover these gaps with, and of course with more and more URUK-HAI flooding in through the gaps, it's becoming more and more of a desperate situation for Rohan to try and hang on, as you would expect, considering the rules of the fight. More arrows coming in, and to be fair, these Rohan spearmen have really done an excellent job in holding this line for as long as they have, because the Rohan archers have, in return, managed to deal with most of the light URUK-HAI infantry that were supporting the trolls over here. And that just goes to show how good Rohan spears are. Like, they may lack in their entirety, really, phalanx units, but their spears can do a very good job at holding the line nonetheless. And you can see here a lot of the axes thrown into the walls, but also many of them finding their mark. A lot of the arrows, also these URUK-HAI reavers way out in the open for the Rohan archers and axe throwers to deal with, and they're going to get absolutely destroyed here. Very, very nice indeed. Isengard still putting pressure on the walls. The Lurt's hunting pack are now inside the fortress. What are they shooting at, I wonder? They're shooting at point blank into Riddermark spears. Maybe not the best use of their time, but considering how Rohan don't have too much infantry anyway, just hitting something they have a good shot on may be worthwhile. But in spite of the reckless friendly fire that they've been engaging in thus far, Isengard are now gaining genuinely the upper hand. The Medicel Guard have presumably already used up their ammunition, and the guards of the Golden Hall are now engaged in melee. They are very good in melee, but there are also only so many of them, and with many of their brethren now running back to the town centre, the superior numbers of the URUK-HAI here, even with the archer support they're getting, it's going to be enough to send them back from whence they came. URUK-HAI pikes are over here. There's still a few, well, there was still a few Rohan units still fighting, but with the URUK-HAI berserkers in here able to assert their dominance over the Westmark marshals. URUK-HAI pikemen in there. Riddermark archers being caught out, but they've certainly already paid for themselves. The Riddermark archers have done very well for themselves in this fight, but now they're being engaged in melee, and of course against URUK-HAI infantry, thoroughly outclassed, and they are going to be bested. Is there anything still left up on the walls? There's a few HELMS hammers, a few Riddermark spearmen, but they too are being overwhelmed. URUK-HAI berserkers and infantry coming up here onto the walls, and that will be enough to finish them off. More and more of Isengard are pouring into the settlement, and unfortunately for Rohan, the more of Isengard that are allowed to get into the settlement, the more difficult their cavalry is going to be to use. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why I'm not really agreeing with Rohan retreating right back to the keep. Because if they have to hold this sort of central position, that suits Isengard, because Isengard can just put a couple of units of pikes on these two gatehouses here, and all of Rohan's lancers will be utterly useless. And of course then Isengard will be free to capture the town centre, and there'll be nothing Rohan can do. So we'll see how that works. We'll see when Rohan's cavalry actually does move forward, as Isengard have most certainly managed to secure the lower section of the fortress. But they certainly had to work for it. Not only did Rohan inflict a decent amount of casualties with their archers, with their armour-piercing infantry, and with their axe throwers, but also Isengard's own black powder caused a decent amount of damage to themselves. It's perhaps fortunate for them that they have a lot of infantry that they can call upon. Still, I think one helm hammer over here in the corner being set upon by all of these URUK-HAI, and he is going to fall. Meanwhile, more Isengard forces heading up the ramp, reavers and crossbowmen. That is something that Rohan have done quite well, however. They haven't allowed the crossbowmen into position yet, which would be devastating, of course. And still, these Westmark spearmen and Riddermark spears are holding the line. They've been reinforced by some Helmengas, but a very resolute defence, and definitely very brave of them. But this is where they ultimately die now, I would imagine, because they are now surrounded. Guards of Orthanc, but they've done very well for themselves. And I feel as though that is a very good example of how strong the Rohan spears are. Meanwhile, being forced back all the way to the final layer as Isengard continue the pressure, which is good to see, but these URUK-HAI raiders are almost certainly going to meet their doom at the hands of the Shield Maidens and the Westmark Marshals. Although those Shield Maidens need to be utilised better, they need to be retreated behind the infantry. And it's not as if Rohan have got too, well, I say they haven't got too much of an excuse, but here comes the cavalry. The champions of the White Hand are here. I actually missed them from Nawaki in the deployment phase. Usually they are absolutely brutal against cavalry, but considering the sheer amount of Rohan cavalry which is cresting the hill, there goes one of the Rohan generals in the lower fortress. Yeah, the amount of cavalry here is going to be the problem, and immediately the champions of the White Hand are broken just because overwhelming force And you can see here the URUK-HAI pikemen trying to set up a sort of rear guard, but the problem here is going to be that Rohan do have access to their horse archers. The Rohan cavalry needs to be utilised a little bit better than this. They need to get around the sides quickly and go after the crossbowmen, because as it is, they're sort of bumbling around, tripping over one another. And I get it, like, even for more experienced players, like, I'm not great at using cavalry, to be honest with you, and I like playing as Rohan. But, like, this, you have to do better than this. Like, you can't just sort of cycle around one another. And this is also just a hideous error of judgment. Like, charging front on into pikes, like, even someone who's never played Total War before, I'm sure, knows to never charge into the face of pikemen with cavalry. Like, you have the run of the field here to go right the way around and into the... Like, this is... Ugh. Like, I might vomit. I might be sick. They're blobbing up their cavalry into a single unit of pikes out here when they've got the... Look at how much room they've got to go into the crossbows. Like, this is where they could have won the fight and they're throwing it away. They're losing it here. Already, I feel confident in saying that Isengard are going to win this at this point. Because that cavalry micro was a thing of utter horror. And they're still doing it. My man, what are you doing with yourself? Here come the Sons of Yorl. I mean, at least they're finally getting into the crossbows, but after the crossbows have already managed to do horrendous damage. Here comes some URUK-HAI Reavers as well. I mean, Isengard haven't really needed to do much here to inflict terrible losses onto the Rohirric cavalry. Like, can you imagine if Eomer arrived at first light on the 5th day, and then his entire army just collided with those pikes? Like, the sun didn't block the URUK-HAI's eyes and they just got skewered on the pikes. Can you imagine how anticlimactic that would have been? Because that's pretty much what's just happened to the Rohirrim cavalry. They may still win this fight out here, to be fair. Like, you know, there's not a lot of Isengard forces out here, and there's plenty of room for the Rohan cavalry. But honestly, I'm actually not sure. Isengard may win this because Rohan seem intent on charging into the front of the pikemen over and over again. URUK-HAI scouts, and are those Aerid of Eldberg in there? No, these are just Eastmark scouts, the cheapest of the Rohirrim cavalry. At least the horse archers are going after the pikes as they should. Well, let's go and see what's happening within the fortress itself. As Isengard continue to try and move forward, Rohan blocking the way with the Westmark Marshals once again, utilising their AP. But they're going to need the support of their thrown projectile units. The Helmengast at the very least are doing that, and so obviously they're going to be very good against the URUK-HAI pikemen. And they're wavering as well. Westmark Marshals, I believe, inspire units around them as well. It's a very minor inspiration bonus, only +2 morale, but that can make all the difference to Rohan, whose morale is okay. It's not as high as some of the other Western Kingdoms, but it's not as low as someone like Cardland. URUK-HAI Berserkers coming up here, so I imagine they're going to start pressuring the other side as well. Decent elite infantry in here, but they're very much bottled up. And Rohan's hopes and dreams rest upon their cavalry. And the URUK-HAI archers and crossbowmen have been allowed to inflict really horrendous damage on the Rohan cavalry, which is where I think Rohan's hopes have gone begging a little bit, which is a shame, because the Rohan cavalry, it didn't need to be this way. They had the opportunity to use their lancers and their ranged cavalry to good effect to turn this fight around, and I do not believe they have taken it. It would have been one thing if Rohan simply couldn't use their cavalry, if like Isengard were taking shelter in the fortress and using their pikemen to plug up the gaps, and it making it very difficult for the Rohan lancers, but as it is, I do not believe that has been the case. Eastmark Riders charging in. They're finally going to get into the crossmen, so to be fair, I mean, as much as Velu Pillai has struggled a little bit so far in using his cavalry, he is now getting into the right targets with his lancers. Eastmark Riders are outside of the scouts, the lowest tier of Rohan cavalry. They still have a decent charge on them, and they're getting right into the URUK-HAI crossmen here. Crossbow's getting a point-blank volley though, which is pretty savage. Over here, more of the Rohirrim horsemen. The Red Shields of Erkenbrand, Riders of the Fold coming in here, getting into the URUK-HAI archers to do yet more damage. So Rohan, despite a pretty disastrous opening to their cavalry phase, they are now starting to inflict some casualties and make up for some of those losses. Eastmark Horse Archers are routing. Guards of Orthanc are out here, as well as some Half-Orc Spearguard. I have to say that Nowaki, for the most part, Rohan have made their own mistakes by charging into his pikes, but he's done a decent job here of making life more difficult for the Rohan cavalry. So credit to him, because this is a very difficult situation to be in when you've got this much cavalry bearing down on you. And to work with, you've only got sort of basic units for the most part. Guards of Orthanc, of course, holding everything together. Eastmark Riders charging into this depleted unit of URUK-HAI archers. May be able to break them off. Very nicely done. Meanwhile, back in the keep, more Isengard forces are here. Isengard continuing to try and get in here. Well, the Berserker's not coming through this section just yet. I can hear the telltale signs of axe throwers. You can see there that Isengard trying to utilise their crossbowmen up on the walls here, but maybe not the best of ideas, because while URUK-HAI crossbowmen, it's very difficult to kill them off quickly with archers. There goes another one of the generals. I think they're getting far too greedy trying to relieve their beleaguered infantry force, and the pikes are killing them. But while they can deal with archers reasonably well, the URUK-HAI crossmen with their armour, axe throwers are a different matter entirely. They're unshielded, their armour is decent, but the high base damage is just proving to be too much for them. Yeah, and the Rohirrim cavalry has simply not been the relief force that it needed to be. Well, here comes some Sons of Yule, 23 of them, obviously very resilient unit of knights, a very, very nice unit of knights as well. More Rohirrim cavalry coming in. The URUK-HAI crossmen, finally it looks as though they're going to be overrun and broken, but not before inflicting heavy casualties on the Rohan cav force. There's a lot of Rohan cavalry, which is why there's still a lot of it left alive, but I mean, to be fair, Riders of the Fold in the background, the red shields. With all these pikes, you could almost consider this an Isengard victory out here, which is a sign of how badly things have gone for Rohan's cavalry. Still trying their best to secure the outer field. The URUK-HAI are coming out here as well. You don't want to get caught in melee with them without charging them. Meanwhile, to be fair, while Rohan's fortunes have not gone so well outside the walls, within the walls, things have looked a little bit better, because Isengard have not utilised this bridge over here into the town centre, and they are funneling into just the one choke point, which is ideal for the Rohan archers, javelins and axe throwers to get as many kills as they possibly can. They still need the cavalry to make up more of the losses than they have done thus far, if they are to win this. But this is still doing what they can to make something happen here. Westmark Marshals, HELMS hammers. A lot of Westmark Marshals still alive, which is bad news for Isengard, because that's a lot of AP. The Berserkers won't mind that too much, but the rest of the Isengard infantry will not be too thrilled to see all of that. A few axes coming in, a few arrows also. Some Riddermark archers in here as well, just trying to make up the numbers, hold back the black tide of URUK-HAI. What have we got going on here? It looks as though at this point Nowaki is content to just sort of leave the cavalry be, and I think he's going to sort of send more and more of his infantry inside the gates. Aeryd of Alberg now getting a good charge off. URUK-HAI archers shaken. Can they break them off? There's more crossbow bolts coming in, however. And again, I feel as though if Rohan had utilised their cavalry a little bit better, they would be in a good position to go on to win this battle. As it is, though, I'm not so sure. They could still win it, but it's going to be difficult if we have a look at the percentage of kills. Yeah, like Rohan are behind. They've got, 5% is not the most to make up, but it's going to be difficult. Their cavalry needs to start doing a little bit better. They're going to charge here into the URUK-HAI Reavers. That wasn't a full charge. They didn't get their lances out, which means they're going to need to get out of there quickly before the Reavers' axes start to take a toll. And then there's also a lot of projectiles coming in to the Aeryd of Alberg. Riders of the Fold and Eastmark Horse Archers running around here as well, but they're not really the heroes Rohan need at this point because they're all bow cavalry. Yeah, there's not a lot of Rohan's cavalry left alive, and you'd have to say that it is a good Isengard victory that they've managed to score out here. Which means that it's all going to come down to the interior. And Isengard have already managed to make the choke point a little bit wider than it could have been. But having said that, Rohan are still using their skirmishers to good effect, and I have to say that is something Rohan have done very well in this fight so far. Their archers and axe throwers that have been on the walls and their javelins have been utilised well, and that is one of the reasons why I think the battle is still as close as it is. Also, the Rohan spears have done a good job at holding the line with the support of those heavy axemen, as you would expect from Rohan. Really, it was just the cavalry component that has been missing. Sons of Yule, they're trying to come in here into the interior of the walls, but they can't really do much in here. As I said, if Isengard get into the interior of the keep, things are going to be more difficult for Rohan to deal with, as Nowaki is now getting his pikes in there. Aerith of Aldberg and Eastmark Riders still doing their thing. It's a very chaotic fight all of a sudden though. And you know, Rohan's cavalry is still doing some damage. The problem is, units like the Sons of Yule are still not going to be overly useful if Isengard can take the interior of the settlement. URUK-HAI crossbows are reloading. Stand and shoot. There are the half-orc spear guard as well. The red shields are broken. It's not a good sign. And I feel as though the Guards of Orthanc once again doing the damage. Reavers in there as well. Guards of Orthanc, of course, with the spears. Spears better against cavalry in 0.97. Crossbows, they're going to... Well, there's no real point in going after the red shields. The red shields are going to try and break back to the town centre. But things are not going to go too well for them. To be fair, that general that died trying to get to the town centre was maybe breaking as well, which is why they were doing that. Helmengas, what are they doing? Well, they must have come down from the walls up here, and at this point, the Helmengas could prevent more Isengard reinforcements from coming in. They'll only be able to do it for a short time, there's only 53 of them. This could be enough to relieve the defenders in the town centre to an extent. URUK-HAI pikemen are wavering. Yeah, I still feel as though Isengard have got this. I mean, there's berserkers that are starting to filter in. More reinforcements are needed. Like, the problem Rohan have is they need to keep at least one unit in reserve in case Isengard do decide to use this bridge over here. But by the same token, they can't afford to let this front line get so weak that URUK-HAI berserkers and Nazkai are able to just rip it to pieces. There are the Medusa Guard utilising their javelins. Very, very good javelins, of course, and then very good in melee, pulling out their swords and their axes. I like the fact that this is a unit that utilises both. I feel as though that's actually a sort of not intentional, but I do kind of like the fact that they utilise the Rohirrim swords and axes. Helmengas are now getting into melee to try and patch up the line. They're still trying to use their skirmishers to their fullest effect, but they're running out of ammunition at this point, Rohan. And that's going to be bad news for them. There's still Rohan cavalry out here on the field, but they're just not having the impact that they really needed to. Britomart cavalry are routing. The Eastmark Riders are shaken. And you've got to give credit to Nowaki, because he has played well out here. He's utilised his crossbows and his pikes well. He's zoned out the cavalry. And ultimately, Rohan have broken their teeth on Isengard out here. And that might be the decisive factor in this battle. Holes in the walls, broken siege towers, the evidence of battle all around. Well, that is one army completely gone for Rohan. Rohan trying to form up their cavalry force once again, but yet again more skirmish fire coming into the Eastmark Riders as Isengard continue to hound them, buying time for the infantry to do its thing in the interior. Those Helmengas were blown through. But having said that, there are some routing URUK-HAI pikemen, primarily as a result of a unit like this, I'm sure, the Medusa Guard, using their javelins up there doing horrendous damage to Isengard on the approach. And that's what Rohan have to hope for at this point, the fact that this unit of Medusa Guard, which I think is the one unit of skirmishers they have left alive, can do enough damage to the Isengard infantry that then Rohan's quality in melee could be enough to see them through. I mean, they've still got a lot of Westmark Marshals back here, they've still got some Helms Hammers, the Medusa Guard themselves are good in melee. But that's a big if, because Isengard have still got a lot of men that they can commit forward to try and take the town centre. It's going to be a tricky one for Rohan to pull off, and if they do it, it will be in spite of their cavalry reinforcements, not because of it. And it will be the ultimate endorsement, really, of Rohan's skirmishers. Very good battle, though. I do like the fact that Isengard have been aggressive as well, because like a lot of people, I think now there is this trend of playing cat and mouse with the defenders, where like you sort of pop your javelins into the gate, try and get a volley off. If you can't, you go back and you sort of go backwards and forwards for 10 minutes, sort of trying to do that. And I understand why people do that, but it isn't half boring and annoying. It is technically the smart thing to do, but it's not the most fun thing to play, and it's not the most fun thing to watch either. But that's a whole nother discussion about the prevalence of javelins. As much as I enjoy using javelins, there is a very real case for saying that they're too big a part of Reforged at this point. As much as I think 0.97 is a big step up from 0.96, it is one of those areas which I'm not quite so sure about. I'm not sure how I feel about it. But Isengard have certainly not been guilty of that. They have just gotten stuck in, and that's good. Helms hammers. Medicel Guard, are they out of ammunition at this point? No, they're still clutching their javelins tightly. And at this point, Rohan are going to commit forward another unit of Westmark Marshals, trying to get round to the flank here of the Isengard assault. On the front line, we can see a combination of Nazkai and URUK-HAI Berserkers, and the Helmengas and the Riddermark Spearmen doing their best to hold them in position. I mean, Medicel Guard javelins, if they still have ammunition, are sorely needed to help deal with them. This is all Rohan have left, really. The cavalry, I think, is going to be a bit of a non-factor as this fight goes along. They can sort of try and feast on the scraps of the army that Nowaki has left out here, but Nowaki has sent more of his pikemen into the interior to try and help take the town centre as we go into the final 10,000 frames. And it is still a 5% differential. 6% actually, rather now. So the attackers are pulled slightly further ahead, although that may change with a few more charges like that. But again, like I said, I really don't feel as though the cavalry on the outside of the settlement is all that important anymore. Like, the Arid of Alberg have got a decent charge on them, the Sons of Yore have got a very good charge on them. But it's not going to matter too much if they have to deal with pikes. Rather than going in on foot, they're going to elect to use the ladders instead for a bit of cardio, I suppose. URUK-HAI pikemen here. That is one thing that Rohan have done very well, to be fair. They haven't allowed the URUK-HAI crossbowmen to really be used to their fullest effect in the inside of the settlement anyway. On the outside of the settlement, the Rohan cavalry was definitely on the end of those bolts more often than they'd have liked. The Westmark Marshals now being engaged by URUK-HAI archers, and they'll be able to slaughter them with those axes. Doing very, very well. The Medicel Guard are now down off the walls, which indicates that they are out of ammunition. Their expertise will be needed in melee. Perhaps the fear they cause will also be able to do some damage to Isengard, because they're coming into melee now, trying to help shore up the Helmengas and the Riddermark Spears, because they will need that, because they're still facing off against Nazkai. And now there's URUK-HAI pikes, and with Rohan out of ammunition, I'm not sure whether they have an answer really for the URUK-HAI pikemen as this fight enters its final phases. I just love the look of the Westmark Marshals. Peak aesthetic. There's a lot of URUK-HAI pikes still alive. In come the Helmhammers as well, adding their own AP to this line, which I feel as though this fight has at least shown that Rohan, even when they are outnumbered and outgunned, they can still hold the line, which I feel as though is a criticism against Rohan, the fact that they don't really have the best ability to hold the line because they don't have access to pikes or halberds. I feel as though this proves that. You know, their spears were very good throughout this entire battle. Even their axemen, to be fair, like, as much as I may say that the Westmark Marshals maybe they don't have as much staying power in melee as I would like, it's a very minor complaint against them because they do a lot of damage to armoured units. And that is something which Isengard have most certainly learnt the hard way in this fight. Medicel Guard now in here as well. Maybe the fear can take effect, especially against all these exhausted Isengard troops. One problem that Isengard may have is the fact that they kind of need their crossbowmen to do a job for them here, and they can't really get into a position to use them, because to get up onto this inner ring they need to first sort of get a foothold. I mean, they could try and go across this bridge and rush up there, but if they do, the Westmark infantry will immediately engage them. So still playing the waiting game, and still on the outside of the settlement here, Rohan's cavalry is doing its best to make up for the missteps that it made earlier on in the fight, and they are still doing damage. And this infantry on the outside of the settlement now could prove to be important if this fight continues to go in the way that it has, because I feel as though Rohan on the interior of the settlement suddenly have got the advantage in terms of elite units. Guards of Orthanc are still here, but the ace in the hole that Isengard have, and now that's not a good sign. It's a very bad sign actually, because I didn't realise that there is actually a door over here. Because the URUK-HAI crossbowmen are now getting into position, and that's going to demand a response. The Westmark infantry are now up on the walls. The only unit they have left in reserve now is this Westmark Marshals unit. If these URUK-HAI crossbowmen still have ammunition, it's going to be devastation for Rohan. That's going to be a match-winning move, because as it was, Rohan were holding the line very resolutely here with the Helms Hammers, the Medicel Guard, the elite units they've got. But now, as it is, They need to stop this advance. It is closer than I thought it would be here in the late game. I thought Rohan, when that cavalry was being thrown headfirst into pikes, I wasn't so sure. But now I'm thinking maybe Rohan can pull this out the bag. The Guards of Orthanc are joining in. It would be harsh on Isengard to go on to lose this fight, considering how they played, but to be fair, the way that they killed a huge portion of their own men with their black powder carts may be what ultimately decides this fight. Maybe these crossbows don't have ammunition, because they are just getting into place here, and that will of course mean that the Westmark Marshals will absolutely butcher them in melee, but if they do have another unit of crossbows that have ammunition, they could get up over here and sort of use their own brethren as a bit of a human shield. But as it is, some Lurtz Hunting Pack firing in to the Rohan cavalry, but at this point the Lurtz Hunting Pack are needed in the town centre, I think. Because the more this fight goes on, the more Rohan are looking pretty good value for money. And at this point, using their cav as a sort of makeshift meat shield in a roundabout kind of way is actually the right thing to do. Similar to how I played Dol Amroth in the last battle I was in that I showed. I was using my high-tier cavalry to sort of protect my allies' just basic infantry, just because that was what the situation called for. And I feel as though it's pretty much the same here for Rohan. As Isengard run ever shorter on manpower here, the crossbows do still have ammo though, and they're going to stand and shoot, and that's going to be devastating. The entirety of this battle, Rohan have been able to stop Isengard from doing this, but now the Space Wizard managing to get his crossbows into a good position, and this may be it. Like, the damage that those crossbows have already done. Yeah, I mean, those Helm Hammers have been absolutely butchered. One of the Isengard generals does fall. Yeah, the Westmark Marshals, in that sort of situation, you need to force path them in so that more than just 4 or 5 of your units are engaging in melee. They may be out of ammunition now, but that may be, those few volleys may have just turned the fight in favour of Isengard there. They are, of course, going to be no match at all for the Westmark Marshals in melee up here, which is the silver lining for Rohan. They will still have this unit of heavy axemen that they can potentially call upon later. But let's not forget, of course, that the Lurtz Hunting Pack is still there. Although I say that, they may not be there for very long. The Sons of Yule, I think they're just going to bypass this and go and try and recharge the Isengard front line, which, with only 6 of them, it's not going to be devastating, but it will still somewhat make them say that, though. Ignoring the Lurtz Hunting Pack means that half of their unit was cut down to size as well. Here comes the URUK-HAI archers. The URUK-HAI infantry trying to block the Sons of Yule and succeeding. Sons of Yule continuing to move in though. The rear charge is not going to be overly devastating though, because I mean it is URUK-HAI pikemen. Defeat seems certain once again for Isengard though. It is a very close fight indeed, this. I don't know, that volley. Did that volley turn it around, or is Rohan's elite infantry still going to be enough? Because the Nazkai and URUK-HAI berserkers were dealt with earlier on. More reinforcements coming in. Obviously the Sons of Yule at this point killed off. URUK-HAI archers coming forward, only 45 of them in melee, but at this point Isengard need everything they can. I'm still surprised they haven't used this bridge over here, because then they could have surrounded Rohan, taken away their melee defense values. Forward comes some URUK-HAI crossmen. If they still have ammunition and they get up onto the walls as well, that would be devastating as well. More half-orc spear guard, excuse me. The Lurtz Hunting Pack are up here as well. They'll be just as useful at this point in melee, I think, because Isengard need an elite unit on the front line just to keep everything sort of tied together. They have the Guards of Orthanc. Yeah, I think Rohan, those crossbow volleys that came in, I feel as though it just cut down their manpower too much, and I think Isengard are going to go on to win this fight, but a very closely fought battle indeed. For a minute there, it did look as though Rohan were going to pull one out of the bag, but those volleys there from the Space Wizard's crossbowman, too much. The Westmark Marshals have just been a little bit too slow in getting through these URUK-HAI crossbows as well. They will, of course, eventually. But now you can see the Lurtz Hunting Pack getting up onto the walls. If they still have ammunition, that's body piercing the Isengard Rangers, and that will be enough to break Rohan's hearts here. There's the URUK-HAI pikes. There's nothing left of the Rohirrim cavalry outside the walls, which was meant to be the saviour, but in the end was not able to do the damage that was needed, and just cavalry being used a little bit less wastefully could have cut down the Isengard infantry, because a big reason of why Isengard, I think, are going to win this fight is the pikemen, Nawaki's pikemen, and they were outside the walls. So with all of Rohan's horse archers and javelin cavalry, they really had no right to still be alive at this point in the battle. But that's the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose. Westmark Marshals still doing their best to do some damage. Lert's hunting pack shifting around. Yeah, you can see here this unit of crossbows from MP Beckamy has still got some bolts left in it, and they're going to be able to get some really nice volleys off here. I say that, not the easiest shots, but at this point just a little bit of ranged support for the Isengard front line is going to be all that's required, I think, to give Isengard the W. Have a look here. Yeah, 5%. I mean, Rohan have pulled it back a little bit, but not enough, I don't think. Westmark infantry. And it's over on this side of things where the guards of Orthanc and the pikemen are more heavily concentrated. They're winning. The Helm Hammers are still doing their best, but there just isn't enough of them at this point. A closely fought fight, but here, unlike the books, Saruman is going to have his victory and Rohan is going to be destroyed. Defeat seems certain. Westmark Marshals up on the walls. There's actually some pikes up on the walls as well, trying to come to the aid, as well as the Lert's hunting pack. Lert's hunting pack will put up a far better fight than the crossbows have been doing against the Westmark Marshals up here on the inner ring of the fortress. More bolts raining down. They're having to arc the shots slightly. They're not getting devastating hits, but grinding the enemy down. And now arriving on the scene, Nawaki's half-orc spear guard, just to pour some salt into the wound. Westmark infantry trying to sort of counter-attack into the URUK-HAI, but with those spear guard arriving, that will be stopped dead in its tracks. Oof. Vicious. And this is probably the unit they probably should have been targeting earlier, because they have a much better shot on it. The Westmark Marshals immediately getting shot. You can see there the power of crossbowman. Nothing makes your heart sink more than when crossbows have got a perfect angle on you. Crossbows are cowards' weapon, really, but they're doing the business here for Isengard, with the Lert's hunting pack and the URUK-HAI pikemen from the front. The Westmark Marshals, having a pretty comfortable fight against the URUK-HAI crossbows for the longest time, are now going to be destroyed. High Ruler over Lorien's army is pretty much the only one that's left, to be honest with you. Don't think there's anything left of anyone else's armies. He's putting up a fight here, but it's not going to be enough in the end. And there they go, they're going to route all the way back to the town centre, a couple of yards away. But that will, of course, allow Isengard to continue going around the outer ring, I say the inner ring of this settlement, and maybe attack Rohan from the rear. And finally, finish them off. The bolts now changing target to the Westmark infantry, seeing that they too are wavering. And in the end, it's going to be Isengard's central pillar, their pikemen, which is going to be the bedrock of their victory here, doing brilliantly against the Rohirrim cavalry, albeit that was facilitated by some pretty terrible cav micro. And then here in the late game, able to hold the very damaging Rohan infantry at bay and slowly but surely poke them down. Very nicely done from Nawaki. I feel fairly comfortable in giving Nawaki the title of MVP for this match. More bolts coming in. The Westmark Marshals, they are back, but there's only 13 of them and they're already wavering once more. Continuing to move around here, Isengard, albeit in a bit of disorganised fashion. But it doesn't matter too much. Again, like this fight has been beyond Rohan for quite a while at this point. But it does go to show how resilient Rohan's infantry can be. I feel as though Rohan's infantry gets a bit of a bad rap, and I mean, I'm a fan of Rohan in .97, to be honest with you, and I would not be a fan of Rohan if their infantry was weak as piss. So just the fact that they're able to sort of reasonably face off against a faction which does have a big focus on its infantry in Isengard goes to show that they aren't defenceless in this aspect. The reason why I think most people may think that is the fact that Rohan do tend to bring a lot of cavalry, which doesn't leave a lot of money left to bring a lot of their better infantry. Be interesting to see some infantry-focused Rohan compositions on a field battle, for example. Maybe that will be what I do next. Who knows? As it is, though, Isengard will be victorious as the timer starts. But a close fight, within 10%. Very nice, and it's always nice to have a bit of a lore-friendly fight. Two rivals as well, in Rohan and Isengard. And in this occasion, Isengard have won. And there goes another general. High Ruler's general finally falling. And I must be said, I rate Isengard very highly in this new patch. I think they're a very strong faction to play as. I feel as though the bigger focus around infantry now certainly benefits Isengard. Their pikes are obviously armoured, which is very good. I do feel as though, one thing that I would say about the patch is I don't feel as though archers are all that impactful in a lot of situations. I feel like archers are a little bit maybe underwhelming. I don't want to say that too loudly because an archer buff is likely to bring back the bad old days of where people just stand and shoot you to death, whereas now you need to be a little bit more proactive, which I do vastly prefer. I prefer archers to be a little bit underpowered than overpowered, just because of the types of games that overpowered archers bring. But that is another thing which sort of benefits more heavily armoured infantry factions like Isengard, and heavily armoured pikemen as well. You know, basic archers struggle to kill heavily armoured pikes, which is worth mentioning. If you see that you're going up against someone with a lot of cheap archers, pikes like the URUK-HAI pikes are not going to be too concerned about that sort of thing. Meanwhile, the final few infantrymen are left alive. There's 3 Medicel Guard, 3 Westmark infantry. The final stand of Rohan, as they try and just kill off as many of the filthy URUK-HAI and Dunlanders as they can. Because of course the guards of Orthanc underneath that armour are Dunlanders, the strongest that there are. There go the Westmark infantry. But a very good fight overall. In spite of the rather dodgy Cav micro, in spite of Isengard blowing up a large portion of their own army with the black powder mine, which they needed to make up for later on in the game, which fortunately they were able to as a unit. But yeah, I do feel as though Isengard deserved the win. I feel as though they did very little wrong. You know, that friendly fire with the fire of Orthanc was really the main thing. Other than that, it was a very nicely executed assault from Isengard, and it was aggressive as well. None of this dodging in and out of the gate with javelins nonsense.
We have nothing to be ashamed of. It's but a cruel twist of fate that snatched victory from our grasp.
Well, I mean, the cavalry maybe, cruel twist of fate. And you can see that a lot of the cavalry was under the command of Valupillai here, and the fact that he got the lowest amount of kills sort of indicates the fact that, the cavalry maybe wasn't used to its fullest potential. Nowaki getting the most kills, and I feel as though that's understandable considering he had the most infantry focus, and I do feel as though he deserves the title of MVP. Sidious, 307, getting the most kills in the game as Rohan. Rohan getting the most kills is unsurprising because, of course, numbers-focused Isengard armies, Rohan on the defence. But let's see what did the damage for the Rohan army. So Riddermark archers getting 215 kills, so cheap archers. I would say, you know, my criticism of sort of archers in general only really applies on a field battle. The fact that they aren't able to kill off certain types of units as quickly as maybe they should be. You know, for example, if javelins or crossbows pop into existence and they're supposed to be weak against archers, the crossbows and javelins will still be able to devastate something before the archers are really able to inflict any sort of damage. In a siege, that is not the case, however, because in a siege, of course, it's a much more slow burn, and units like the Riddermark archers, as we saw in the early phase of the battle, are still going to be able to do a lot of damage. The Shield Maidens did okay. I feel as though when we look at the other armies, the other units of Shield Maidens probably did better, because I certainly feel as though they were a big part of Rohan's defence. Medicel Guard did okay, of course, in melee and range, Helms, hammers. Riddermark Spearmen, though, 255 kills. I feel as though that was the unit that was holding the gate, and that is another factor of Rohan's army you need to take into account. Spears are very good, albeit the other units of Spears for Sidious didn't do too well, but I feel as though they were probably overwhelmed in the lower section of the fortress. A lot of the cavalry was a little bit underwhelming here from Valupillai, but the Sons of Yule still breaking 100 kills as a unit of knights often will because of how strong they are. The rest of the cavalry, however, the Eastmark scouts doing abysmally, and I feel as though that was because they charged into the front of pikes. They're never going to do well if you do that. A full cavalry army, however, from him. So, yeah. High Ruler over Lorien, however, let's see what did the... Yeah, the Shield Maidens, much better for High Ruler. Riddermark archers still getting the most kills, however. But yeah, the skirmishers for Rohan doing very well. Some of the infantry, the Helmingas, both at range and in melee, pulling their weight. You'd have to say that the infantry was a little bit better from Sidious's, but the ranged units probably did slightly better for High Ruler. As for Isengard, we can only postulate what the kills they got were, but I would imagine the pikes did quite well for themselves against the cavalry and the infantry, and of course the crossbows when they finally got into position. Yeah, big thank you to Sidious307 for sending this one in, because it was a very enjoyable fight to behold, a nice lore-friendly fight. The first night battle I've actually posted where you could probably see most of what was going on. I feel as though I'm very happy with the shaders that I've got going on at the moment. But yeah, I've got a lot of fights still to work my way through. I think the next one will probably be on one of the sort of additional maps that have been added post-release of the patch, on one of the new Linden maps which has been released. I feel as though that will probably be the next one I do. We shall see. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.